Megs. I don't do this, so it could be interesting to see how this all works out. This is going to be the most informal, non-produced video that you'll ever see on YouTube, probably. And I would apologize, but I honestly just don't care all that much. Um, I have a little bit of information that I would like to just get out there. I think there's some people, not many, but some people who would probably be interested. And so I decided to throw this together, and we're just going to do our best. Might get interrupted by kids. You might hear my kids swimming in the background. Might get interrupted by dogs. Might hear some crickets and birds. I live in Tennessee, and I'm sitting on the porch and enjoying this gorgeous day that we have on June 19th, Sunday, June 19th, 2022. So, anyway, with that, let's get to the information. To start out, everything that we're going to be talking about here is really based on the work of a man by the name of John Pratt. And John, for 40 years or so before he died last year, spent his time studying biblical chronology and over the years discovered what he believed to be a set of what he calls sacred calendars. And I'm not going to go too deep into that. I think the people who end up watching this video might already know John's work and understand it. And if not, I might do other videos down the line here to explain that. But if you're interested, you got this great site, johnpratt.com, that has all of his stuff for all the years that he was writing, for you to review and come to your own conclusions about the validity of his work. I certainly believe that his work is important, and I've spent a good decade, maybe a little bit more, watching, talking with him now and again, and researching, trying to understand what his arguments are and what the implications of those arguments are. And I found it a very fruitful study, and so I'm excited to sort of be able to put something out there that's based on his work that might be relevant. So anyway, a little bit about me, just to sort of help establish who I am and why I'm doing this. Um, I am by trade in the IT world, and I started about 15 years in IT, and I've been a .NET developer. I have been a systems administrator. I have been a systems engineer. I was for a short time a sales engineer, and now I'm a consultant. And I mostly work on uh, data analysis projects, I guess would be a good way of saying that. Maybe not the best way. I work on full stack observability, which is neither here nor there. But the bulk of my job is in helping companies learn how to utilize their data to make better decisions. And so that translates pretty well over here to John's work, because John's calendar models um, definitely generate a lot of data. And so over the years, I've tried to look at that data and analyze it and come up with different conclusions of my own. And just recently, I've come across something that I didn't see him ever publish about, that I think might be worth considering for those people who enjoy John's work. And so I just wanted to put this video out. Um, so the general gist of it here, again, without going too deep into John's work, you can kind of start it at this. John has a calendar spreadsheet on his website, and with the help of this ChirpJ plugin on the Chrome browser, um, you can still utilize this. The link to the ChirpJ is right here on the page, and you can just install it and then run this. And this is what I used to use to do a lot of my research. And it's a good tool for sort of light research, but definitely not any sort of like um, tremendously useful data analytics tool. It's basically a spreadsheet here you're going to see that has the names of the calendars that he has discovered or studied on the top, and the names of the events that John believes he has identified the dates for, along with the dates on all of those calendars. And the really important thing to point out here is simply that um, red days are what would be considered most holy. You can see he explains it up here. And blue are also holy, but just not what he considers most holy. And, again, I'm not going to go into why he thinks it's holy, why he doesn't think it's holy. If you don't know already, there's certainly tons of material to study on the website to help you understand that. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to accept his conclusions as true and try to extend what he found into a new finding. So, um, like I said, I had been using this, but concurrently I'd been developing little software tools that were similar to this, um, but I was continually bumping up against a problem, um, which I'll just call like the quarter day accuracy problem. So in John's work, he was able to write code that made it so that on the Julian day calendar, if you want to call it that, might not be the best. It's more of a day count than it is a calendar, but he was able to do these decimals. And the importance of that, well, first let's talk about why that's important. So these calendars, the days start at different times on the different calendars. So for example, the Hebrew calendar, you might already know, starts at sundown. And so for us, what would be considered a Thursday evening to them is considered like a Friday morning, right? Or the beginning of the day on Friday might be a better way of saying that. And I do apologize. I studied this for a long time, but I am by no means an expert, and I might use words incorrectly. And so I would just ask for a little bit of grace in that. I think I can get the ideas across in a way that you can understand without being necessarily technically correct. So feel free to leave any comments that you want to down below. Can't say that I'll pay a whole lot of attention, but definitely always open to being corrected if I use words incorrectly or identify concepts incorrectly. So the idea here, though, is that the practical consequence of the fact that these calendars start at different times, some of them will start at 6 p.m., some of them will start at midnight, some of them will start at 6 a.m. The practical consequence of that is that these boxes only turn red for 6 hours at a time sometimes. So for example, if I were to take this and change it to 0.0, you can see that these turn to blue. And so what that means is that these, what John referred to as red letter days, become more rare because the synchronization of the calendars only happens for 6 hours at a time. And as I was developing tools, I kept continually running up against this problem that I could not replicate this behavior from his application to accurately reflect quarter day accuracy. Well, that was fine. I wasn't doing heavy analysis. It was for my enjoyment and that kind of thing. And so it was no big deal, but it always did kind of gnaw at me a little bit. And this week I was showing my sons some of John's work and talking about it, and was talking to one of my sons about this. And all of a sudden, as we were looking at the problem and looking at some code, it really dawned on me that like I didn't need to like do it the way John did it. That I could write really application specific code. And although it might not, it's a hack is what it is. Let's just be honest, it's a hack. But the great thing about some hacks is that they accurately reflect the model without actually being a part of the model. And that's what I've got here. Is I was able to write a couple methods that accurately that do the same thing that John's applications do without it necessarily being a part of his model. And so what that allowed me to do is what I'd like to talk to you about today. So I've developed this prototype. We're calling it Calendar Watcher because we're not feeling all that creative at the moment. But it's really just designed to look at what John seemed to think were the three most important calendars and create a tool that you can visualize John's work instead of looking at it in like sort of a data format, which I have found over the years as I have taught that having a good visualization is really critical to helping people understand something, especially when it has to do with statistics, which chronology does. And John's arguments specifically have a lot to do with statistical probabilities and that kind of thing. So I developed this little prototype application, and we're just going to run it, and I'll show you sort of what I did. I've had something like this for a long time, but it didn't have that quarter day accuracy, but I was able to build in this code that builds in the quarter day accuracy. And what I want to show you here is that when this day rolls over, you're going to see that I'm now able to accurately model the same thing that you see in John's application, right? And then I'm just going to pause it real quick because what you see is like it only lasts for a very short amount of time. And then one of the calendars goes out of the major holy day state into no holy day state. So this was really exciting for me because for a long time I've wanted to gather the data about these red letter days, and as far as I know, John never provided that. And so by putting this code into my application and then just simply capturing any time that these three go red and then exporting that data, I was able to generate a data set that is here that shows every red letter date for the time period from 4070 BC out to 2300 AD, and of course it can extend as far as we want. But it took about 7 hours for this to run, and I decided that that was enough data to do the analysis that I wanted to. So, to give you an idea of how this works, I just want to run you through sort of the sample of data that I am looking at that I think might have a significant finding. And I want to really point out here that what I'm talking about here, this is not anything like earth-shattering, or I'm certainly not a prophet. I'm not here to predict anything. I am a data analyst, and I'm analyzing some data that is being generated by a model, and that's really all there is to it. But it is an interesting finding, and over the years, I do this for companies all the time, and what I would call this is a sort of a proof of concept, right? And the idea is that John threw out some models that are mathematical and that create falsifiable data, and by observing that, we can run experiments and we can make observations about patterns, and we can make determinations about whether we feel like the models accurately represent reality or whether or not they should be rejected. And so today I just want to show you what I found in this sort of initial go around of utilizing this new tool, and then of course you can do whatever you want with it. So let's take a look. So the first thing we have to do, and again this is a prototype still, I hope you'll bear with me here a little bit, but is we need to go backwards a little bit, and I'm going to start this analysis in like the 50s, and so we're going to speed things up a little bit, and then we're just going to keep going backwards in time. 81, 71, 61, 51. Okay, now we're going to speed things up and we're going to go through time really fast. And what the application does is when it hits one of these red letter days, it slows everything down so that you can see it. So we should see one day here in the 50s, I believe, that's a red letter day if I remember right. And then we're just going to watch for a while and observe, right? That's what a visualization tool is for, is to observe data. So hopefully it looks like maybe, was it in the 50s? Looks like maybe not in the 50s. We can look at our data set, right? And the major point is we can let that run, because the major point here is simply that that application is running and no red letter days are popping up, right? And yeah, so I would have expected to see one in 54, but let's sort of see what happens here as we run this further and further. So far, the application hasn't stopped. So in 20 years, we've gone from 51 to 71, and there hasn't been a single red letter day. And just, to describe what a red letter day is for the sake of this study, John talked about it in terms of, when you used to get an old calendar, the holidays would be marked in red ink. And so, cultures across the world understand that a red letter day is a day of special importance. And so for this particular instance, what I'm looking at is that, oh, and I know exactly what's happening here, actually. I commented out the line of code so that it would run. So I apologize for that. Let's go look at the code real quick. In fact, it might already be up. Is it already up? It is. And so if we add this back in, what we'll do is we will not start it in the 50s. We'll start it in like the 70s instead, and we'll watch. So I apologize for that. Again, this is going to be a very informal video. If I get a little bit of time, I will edit that little part out. and hopefully not waste your time. But this is what you get when you throw together a video sort of last minute. So yeah, so the red letter days for this study is simply when all three of these turn red. It's going to log it, and then we're going to output that so that we can observe how often it happens and whether or not there are any patterns as to when it happens. So that's sort of the general idea of what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and start moving backwards again and speed things up. There we go. Going backwards, going backwards, going backwards. Okay, and here we go. And now we're going to speed it up. We're going to go forward, 72, 73. So pretend that we started back in the 50s and just take my word for it at the moment, but there was one day in the 50s that was a red letter day. Maybe, yeah, and one day. And then from 54 all the way up until the next time it stops, which I'm not going to ruin the surprise, but there's none, right? So we're going all through the 70s, and there's no red letter days, right? So if John's hypothesis is true and red letter days are days on which important historical religious events happen, then what we can say is that no day in the 1970s was important enough for God to include a red letter day on his calendars. So we go through the 80s, and what we see is that we're all the way up into 84, 85, and still we're not seeing any red letter days. And so, as a data analyst, this is, interesting. Now, I did an analysis on all red letter days, and it's not that shocking because what we find is that red letter days over the course of history are not that common. In fact, it's like 0.0002%. Okay, here we go. So 1989, we get one day, right? And for a quarter of a day, all the calendars are aligned, and this is a red letter day. Now, you might look at that and say, well, nothing happened in 1989. And John and I would both agree with you that, as far as we know, nothing important happened in 1989. But I would just say that we don't necessarily know God in his mind, right? And so something may have happened in 1989 that we're not aware of yet. Or perhaps the pattern is not necessarily that every red letter day something important happens. So yeah, that's not something that I really want to spend a lot of time arguing about. The point is that from 54 until 89, there were no red letter days. Okay, so then we make it go fast again. We are speeding through time. We're up into the 90s. What we see is there's one more day coming up here that is going to be a red letter day. I think right around in here. There you go, September 95. And so again, you're saying, well, September 26, 95, I don't remember anything important happening. And again, John would say, yeah, the calendars, it's not always that. In fact, I think his argument is in his articles is that on the days when events happened, the people involved in the events didn't know that they were red letter days at all. John really viewed the calendars as an opportunity to testify of past events, not to predict or prophesy future events. And so John might say, if he were here, and I don't want to put John's words in John's mouth, but I would just say then that perhaps something happened that we just don't know about, just like all the other events happened and other people did not know about. So there's not even any indication that people like Joseph Smith or other prophets knew that the things that were happening according to God's calendars. So now we set it forward again, and we're watching, and we see, okay, so for 70-something years, we see two red letter days, right? Which I would say is not all that fascinating, right? But what I want you to watch here is in the next 30 seconds to a minute, we're going to hit a time frame in which something that I consider interesting happens. So keep your eyes on this, and we're going to hit a date here that's not too far off into the future. And as you can imagine, we're going to hit one of these red letter days. So let's keep our eyes open and just watch. We're now almost up to the present day. We're at 2015. So about 7 years away from current date. And we're going to need to go a little bit into the future to see what it is that I want to point out. So I think I can actually help us a little bit. There you go. I just bumped us a decade, and now you're going to just have to trust me again that there's no red letter days in there. If you don't trust me, we'll run it again, another time. But what you'll see here is, boom, Friday, 2nd of April, 2032, we get a red letter day. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I just want to point out to those of you who study John's work that Friday the 2nd of April is probably setting off some alarm bells, because those of us who study this know that dates in April tend to be highly significant on the Hebrew calendar. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, about why that is. But just for now, just file that away and let's run the calendar again. So remember, from the 50s up through 2032, we had 2 dates. Then starting in 2032, through this little time period that I'm going to show you, we are going to have more than 2. And I guess I'll ruin it here, but the number is 3. And let's just watch and see how fast it happens. So 2032, we're kind of going through this pattern, and it looks the same as the old pattern, right? Like we're going through a decade and nothing happens. And so we're like, okay, no big deal. But then all of a sudden, we're going to get up here to the late 2040s. And let's watch what happens. All right, so we've hit every day between 2032 and 2047. We're about to hit 2048. And all of a sudden, we're going to get another red letter day. Now, this date doesn't, like when I saw it, it didn't look all that interesting to me. Like 26th of March, I mean, that can be around Easter time on our calendar, but like the Gregorian calendar has not shown to be a sacred calendar at all. It seems pretty clear that it was created by man, and so no big deal there. But I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. In 16 years, I mean, that's not out of the ordinary. Let's just keep running it. So we hit it again, and here's where things got a little bit interesting for me. So we run it, and we expect it to maybe go for a while, but almost immediately in the year 2051, we hit another red letter day. And this red letter day is actually really interesting, and this is what sort of got my curiosity going, because dates in September on the Gregorian calendar tend to also be significant, very significant on the Hebrew calendar. So let's talk about why that is, and let's just look at these dates a little bit. And I'll probably miss some things, but I'm going to give you the main gist of it. So the overall pattern that as a data analyst I saw here is that after a long period of not many red letter days, we suddenly hit a little bump in the data where we see several red letter days highly compressed. And that's interesting when you're looking at data. And so the first thing that was interesting about it was the dates themselves. So I started digging around, and what I found is that original 2032 date is on Friday the 21st of Nisan, 5792 on the traditional Hebrew calendar. Just as a note, the traditional Hebrew calendar and the Hebrew calendar that John used are slightly different, but interestingly enough, for this particular time period, all the dates actually line up and are the same on John's version of the Hebrew calendar and the traditional Hebrew calendar that the Jews continue to use to this day. So Friday the 21st of Nisan turns out to be an incredibly significant day on the Jewish calendar. It's actually the last day of Passover in that year. So the last day of Passover in April 2032 is April 2nd, and it happens to be a red letter day according to John's models. Now, just really quickly, one of the reasons this is significant is for those of you who've studied John's work, you'll see right away that he talked a lot about how many important, like really important religious events happened during either on the first day or the last day of Passover. And so, for example, Moses parting the Red Sea happened on a Passover day. The angel passing over the Israelites' households and killing the Egyptian children, Passover day, obviously, that's what it's named after. Lehi leaving Jerusalem, John believes, happened on a Passover day. Christ's resurrection happened on one of these important Passover days. So this immediately stuck out to me as really critical. And I'm not going to show you, but if you were to go to John's calendar spreadsheet and throw this day in, or actually, you know what, it's already up. I don't have to show you. What you can see is that not only on the 3 calendars that I'm observing, but on all of these calendars, that was a red letter day. Christ's resurrection, which was a Passover day, was a red letter day. And so this really caught my attention. So I moved on to the second date, which was the 2048 date. And to be honest, like, I don't really see anything too interesting about that. it doesn't, I mean, there might be something, and like obviously if people want to look at it, and I might look at it more closely, but right away I didn't see anything interesting. So I just went to this last date, and it kind of confirmed that I was looking at something that might be interesting. So what I saw here is that all of a sudden we're looking at the first of Tishri in the year 5812 on the Hebrew calendar, which is the year 2051 on the Gregorian calendar. And this is the most holy day of that year. So it's Rosh Hashanah. And for those of you who have studied John's work, or sacred calendars, or biblical chronology, or the Jewish calendar, you're going to notice, you're going to know that this day is a critical day in Jewish history, but also in the future for the Jews, because Rosh Hashanah is the time when the Feast of Trumpets occurs. And it's a commonly held belief amongst both Jews and Christians that the Messiah will come to the earth during the Feast of Trumpets. So the fact that the first date of the triad occurred during Passover, and the last date occurred on the Feast of Trumpets definitely like got my interest. And as a professional data analyst, like we would just call that a finding, right? And if I were doing this for a client, this would definitely be something that I would take back to them and say, hey, we should take a look at this. Like it doesn't prove anything, but it's evidence that there might be something here, and we should take a closer look. So as I thought about it, I had a sort of a weird, not premonition, but like a weird prompting, I guess is what you would call it, to look at the duration of time between the second date in the triad, March 26th, 2048, and the third date in the triad, September 7th, 2051. And when I did this, this is really what sort of put it over the edge for me and made me decide that I was going to actually publish this out to the world for those who are interested in this kind of thing to look at as something potentially interesting. So when I went and I plugged those two dates into a duration calendar, or calculator, excuse me, I was just flabbergasted, because it ends up that the time between those two dates is 1,260 days. Now, for those of you who are new to this, that might not mean anything, but for even sort of the casual student of the Bible, 1,260 days might pop out. And for those who are interested in biblical chronology, and specifically in events surrounding the second coming, or the process, what I'll call the process of the second coming, 1,260 days is, I mean, it's a critical number. It shows up in the book of Daniel. It shows up in the book of Revelation. And it specifically, in one of those instances, is relating to events immediately preceding the return of the Savior, or if you're a Jew, the appearance of the Messiah. And of course, if you're a Jew, you don't believe in the New Testament, and so you don't read the book of Revelation. But you get the idea here, right? Like this day period, this time span of 1,260 days, is one of the few specifically named time spans in the Bible. And it just so happens that the time span between the second date of the triad and the third date of the triad is exactly 1,260 days. Now, for those of you who like to be exact, I do want to just point out that the day count does not include the end date in the calculation. You can see that I did not check that when I did this originally. But when that date popped up, or when that time span popped up of 1,260 days, I mean, that really set off some alarm bells and red flags, and told me as a researcher that this is something worth spending time really digging into and looking at. So, you know, we could sit here and we could speculate. We could pretend that we're prophets. We could pretend that we know what's going to happen and predict, what this all represents. I'm just not really inclined to do that. Again, I have some ideas, but it doesn't really matter what I think about it. The only thing I really want to point out is that we have here some data that appears to be a pretty compelling case study for the accuracy of John Pratt's calendar models, that might also be worth exploring for those of us who consider ourselves people who seriously believe that viewing the heavens utilizing them for signs, and utilizing the data that's produced from those observations might be useful as we try to prepare ourselves, our families, our communities in the world for the return of the Savior. This might be a useful thing to look at. So, um, to wrap up, I don't think I have anything else other than that. But to wrap up, let's just do a really quick conclusion. And I'm actually just going to read this, I think. I'm writing a little bit about it, and I think I do a fairly good job here. So let's just read this. So here's what I'm asking you to consider, okay? One, John Pratt claims to have discovered multiple sacred calendars that appear to reveal a clear, statistically significant pattern of having historically significant religious events happen on days which are holy on multiple calendars simultaneously. Two, one of, if not the most impressive pattern in regards to this phenomena, is what can be referred to as red letter days, or days on which the event occurs within a 6-hour time period in which the Venus sacred round and Hebrew calendars are all in a major holy day status. And like I showed you, it can be more than just those three, but for the case of this study, I'm only looking at those three calendars. Future studies could definitely look at all the calendars that John talks about. Number three, the number and significance of important religious events in the past that have occurred on red letter days can rationally be interpreted as evidence that God indeed designed these calendars and is using them. Number four, in the next 30 years, what appears to be a rare triad, or maybe tetrad, I don't know what the right word is, of red letter days occurs. We can see that from the data. I'm just going to read that one more time because it's important to just understand that we see this from the data, right? In the next 30 years, what appears to be a rare triad of red letter days occurs. The first of these days happens on the first day of Passover on the Hebrew calendar, which historically has shown to be a day where new beginnings or big firsts occur. The last of these days occurs on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. I'm probably saying that terribly. I sincerely apologize to those of you who know how to say it. Or the Feast of Trumpets, which traditionally is understood by both Jews and Christians to be the time of year when the long-expected Messiah will appear or return, depending on your perspective. C, the time span between the second and third dates in the triad is exactly 1,260 days, a number which is specifically revealed in the Bible, points specifically to events surrounding the second coming process, and even more specifically, in at least one case of its usage, points to the wrapping up of that process. So, yeah, again, I'll leave it up to you, to decide what you want to do with this information. I'm happy to give this prototype of this application to anybody who would like it. I'm hoping to get it up on as a Windows executable and also on the Apple Play Store, the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store relatively quickly, hopefully within the week. But if you absolutely need it, I'm pretty easy to find. Probably the easiest way to track me down would be through LinkedIn, and you can just send me a request. I'd be happy to send you this prototype so that you can utilize it. Happy to send anybody that would like it the data set. And I would really highly encourage people to try to tear apart what I've done here, see if I've made any mistakes. There's a very real possibility that I have. Would love to hear about it and see what the mistakes are, but also would love to see if other people can come up with other things. Definitely you could I looked at the fact that these are significant on the Hebrew calendar, but there's a decent chance that if we look at the symbolism, of the sacred round dates, that perhaps would reveal something as well, right? Also, the Venus cycle, those holy days happen at important parts of Venus's orbital cycle, and maybe we would find a pattern there as well. I just haven't had time to do that analysis. I certainly will be doing it, but it would be fun to, and also a lot of people looking at it, we're going to get better results. So I would encourage people who are interested in this to utilize this tool and look at this data set and see if other patterns pop out, and we can and see anything else. I have no, as in zero, expectation that we'll be able to identify anything in terms of a specific event happening on a specific day. That's not at all what I'm here to do or to talk about. But I do think that it would be a fruitful study and that if we do it in the proper spirit and with the proper integrity, that it might reveal some things to those of us who care about this that will be important as we try to prepare for that day that we are most looking forward to, the day in which the Messiah comes to the earth to rule and reign and put down his enemies. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this. And again, I apologize for the informality of it. I have no idea if you can hear my children screaming and playing in the pool or any of the other things that have been going on, but I thank you for your patience and your grace in that. And we'll try to do better as we make more videos at making them more presentable. But I did want to just get this out so that people can start looking at it and playing around with the data. So God bless everyone. I hope everybody's having a great Sabbath day if you're a Christian, and we'll look forward to hearing from you and maybe working with some of you in the future. Take care. God bless.